The scent of Grandma Ellis's apple pie lingered in the air. But today it felt more like a funeral offering than our traditional Sunday family dessert. I stared at the golden brown crust on my plate, trying to ignore the tension that filled every corner of my parents' antique-filled dining room like invisible smoke. The reading of my grandfather's will should have been a somber affair marked by shared grief, not this barely concealed celebration of my brother's windfall at my expense. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I glanced at my older brother Morgan, who wasn't even trying to hide his triumphant smirk behind his coffee cup. At 32, he was everything our family had dreamed of: Harvard law graduate, engaged to a surgeon's daughter, and now, apparently, worthy of inheriting everything our grandfather had spent a lifetime building. All of Grandpa's estate holdings will support Morgan's new venture, Dad added, finally meeting my eyes. It's the sensible choice. Sensible. Their favorite word when it came to dismissing my dreams. I took a small bite of pie, letting the familiar cinnamon and apple flavors remind me of afternoons in Grandpa Ellis's kitchen, the only place where my ideas had ever been taken seriously. I understand, I said quietly. They all looked surprised by my calm acceptance. They had clearly expected tears, protests, maybe even the kind of dramatic scene Morgan had mastered whenever his perfect life hit the slightest bump. Well, Mom said, clearly thrown off balance by my reaction, I'm glad you're being mature about this. If only they knew. What they didn't realize, what none of them had bothered to discover, was that I hadn't needed that inheritance for the past 18 months. While they were busy praising Morgan's every career move, I had been quietly building something of my own. It started 3 years ago when I was 26. I was working as an events coordinator at the Wellington Hotel, saving every penny I could. One evening, while organizing a retirement party, I overheard Dominic Vega, CEO of Vega Properties, discussing a problem with affordable housing developments in our city. The major development firms were price gouging smaller contractors, creating a monopoly that drove up housing costs and pushed out middle-class families. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the housing crisis, about the families being priced out of their neighborhoods. So I did what I always did. I researched. For weeks, I analyzed zoning laws, property values, development costs, and construction regulations. I created a detailed business model for a community-focused development company that could work with smaller contractors, offering fair prices and creating affordable housing. When Dominic returned to the Wellington for another event, I handed him both his name card and my proposal. He called me that same evening. 6 months later, I was his silent partner in a new development company, Community First Properties. We offered reasonable rates to contractors, focused on sustainable, affordable housing, and within a year, we had secured projects across 3 counties, including the revitalization of the historic Riverside District, a project my family's real estate law firm had deemed unprofitable and advised their clients against. They just didn't know who was behind it yet. I took another bite of pie, watching my family discuss Morgan's bright future. Mom was already planning which office building would be suitable for his new law firm. Dad was talking about introducing him to his judge friends. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. A text from Dominic. It's done. The Riverside acquisition is official. You now own controlling interest in Community First. I allowed myself a small smile. Perfect timing. Eliza, are you listening? Mom's voice cut through my thoughts. We need you to sign the inheritance transfer papers tomorrow. Of course, I said. I'll come by Mr. Harrington's office in the morning. I really appreciate this, sis, Morgan said, his voice dripping with condescension. I promise I'll make Grandpa proud. If he noticed the slight edge to my smile, he didn't show it. Later that night, as I drove home to my modest but charming craftsman bungalow, the first property I'd personally renovated, I thought about how tomorrow would unfold. Mom and Dad had no idea that Ellis & Associates, their prestigious real estate law firm, had been struggling for months before Community First stepped in with exclusive contracts for our affordable housing developments. They had no idea that their recent upturn in profits was entirely due to the company their impractical daughter had built. They were about to learn. My phone buzzed again. Dominic. Board meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. right after your family's appointment with the lawyer. Ready to shock some people? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I typed back, "They won't know what hit them." At home, I pulled out the document I'd been keeping in my fireproof safe. It was a detailed report of Ellis and Associates' financial history, including every declining quarter since Morgan had joined the firm, followed by their dramatic recovery after securing the Community First contracts. My parents had always said I was bad with practical matters, too creative, too idealistic, not grounded enough. They never noticed that I was the one who spotted the problems in their firm's direction when I was just 24. They dismissed my suggestions about expanding into community development. They laughed when I talked about starting my own company. Tomorrow, the laughing would stop. I laid out my outfit for the morning, a tailored navy suit I'd bought myself with my first real profits. Professional, powerful, nothing like the bohemian style my mother was always trying to correct. As I fell asleep, I thought about the expression that would cross their faces when they realized who was behind Community First Properties. When they understood that the daughter they dismissed had become the silent force keeping their family legacy alive. The next morning dawned crisp and clear with September sunlight streaming through gold-tinged leaves. I arrived at Harrington and Associates 10 minutes early, dressed impeccably and carrying a leather portfolio my family had never seen. They were already there, Morgan lounging confidently in his chair while Mom fussed with his already perfect tie. Dad was making small talk with Mr. Harrington, their longtime family lawyer who had handled my grandfather's affairs for decades. "Ah, Eliza," Mr. Harrington said as I walked in, his eyes briefly registering surprise at my appearance. "We just need your signature on these transfer documents." I sat down calmly, accepting the papers he slid across the desk. "Before I sign," I said, "I'd like to review something with everyone." I opened my portfolio and pulled out several documents. "Did you know," I began conversationally, "that Ellis and Associates was 3 months away from losing its Class A office space last year?" Dad's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Your client base was shrinking rapidly," I continued, laying out the financial reports. "You were bleeding Associates to larger firms until, mysteriously, a new development company came in with exclusive contracts." Mom's face had gone pale. "How do you know all this?" "Because," I said, finally letting my calm mask slip slightly, "I own that development company." The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible," Dad stammered. "Community First is owned by Dominic Vega." "Dominic is my partner," I corrected. "As of yesterday morning, I own controlling interest." I pulled out the final document, proof of ownership with my name clearly listed. "This is a joke," Morgan said, his voice rising. "Eliza doesn't know anything about real estate or development. She's just an events planner." "Was an events planner," I corrected. "Now I'm the majority owner of a company that has development projects in 3 counties, including the Riverside Revitalization, the same project you advised your clients would never be profitable." Mr. Harrington, who had been quietly reviewing the documents, cleared his throat. "These appear to be in order. Miss Ellis indeed owns Community First Properties." Mom's hands were trembling. But Morgan needs this money for his firm," she said. "No," I said, standing up. "He doesn't. Because I'm not signing anything." "You can't do this!" Morgan shouted, his perfect composure finally cracking. "Actually, I can. And one more thing." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. "Community First Properties," Dominic Vega speaking. "Dominic, it's Eliza. Please implement the contract changes we discussed. Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Ellis." I ended the call and looked at my family's shocked faces. "Your exclusive contracts with Community First just became non-exclusive. Your rates just went up 15%. And every other law firm in the city will be getting our business too." Dad slumped in his chair. "Eliza, please. The firm can't survive that kind of change. You should have thought about that before deciding I wasn't worth investing in." I gathered my things and headed for the door. "Oh, and Morgan?" "Better start looking for clients on your own merit." I hear that's quite practical. Mom called daily, switching between tearful pleas and angry accusations. Dad's emails grew more frantic as their firm's client list began to shrink. Morgan, predictably, took to social media, painting me as the vengeful sister who destroyed his dreams out of jealousy. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on expanding Community First's reach. Dominic and I had acquired a small construction company, strengthening our ability to deliver on our affordable housing projects. Our office, once a modest space above a local coffee shop, now occupied the entire 12th floor of the Riverside Tower, the first completed building in our revitalization project. "Miss Ellis," my assistant Zoe's voice came through the intercom, "your father is in the lobby again." I glanced at the security feed on my tablet. Dad looked smaller somehow, his usually pristine suit slightly wrinkled, his confidence visibly diminished. "Send him up," I said after a moment's consideration. When he walked into my office, he stopped short, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic view of the city, the sustainable bamboo furnishings, the wall of community impact awards we'd accumulated in just 18 months. "Quite a view," he said awkwardly. "Very different from planning weddings at the Wellington, isn't it?" I gestured to a chair. "Please sit." He sank into the seat, fidgeting with his gold cufflinks, the ones Grandpa had given him when he made partner. "Eliza, we need to talk about the contracts. The contracts are non-negotiable. You're killing the firm." His composure cracked. "Is that what you want? To destroy your family's legacy?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "Tell me something, Dad. When did you last review the firm's accounts yourself? Not just the summaries from your accountant, but the actual numbers?" He blinked. I have people for that." "Yes, you do. And those people have been letting Morgan make decisions that have been driving the firm into the ground for years." I pulled out a thick file and slid it across the desk. "Your son has been taking on flashy, high-profile cases that look good in the press but have abysmal success rates. He's been alienating your long-term clients with his arrogance while billing excessive hours for minimal work." Dad's hands shook as he opened the file. "How did you? Because unlike you, I pay attention. I've been watching Ellis and Associates since I graduated college, trying to tell you something was wrong, but you never listened. Why didn't you just tell me about this directly? Would you have believed me over your perfect son? The Harvard graduate who could do no wrong. The one who deserved my inheritance because he was more practical?" He stared at the documents, color draining from his face as he recognized the scope of Morgan's mismanagement. "This will ruin us." "No," I said quietly. "It would have ruined you. I've already stopped it." His head snapped up. "What?" I pressed a button on my phone. "Zoe, please send in Mr. Vega and the files." Dominic walked in carrying another stack of documents. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellis. I believe you'll find these interesting." 3 days ago, I explained, Community First secured enough client commitments to keep Ellis and Associates afloat for the next 5 years. We've already restructured the billing system that Morgan implemented and returned to Grandpa's client-centered approach. The firm's reputation can be salvaged. Dad's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "You see," I continued, "I didn't change the contracts to hurt the firm. I did it to force everyone to recognize who has really been keeping the Ellis legacy alive." You saved the firm? 51% of it is now under my control. You retain 30%. The remaining shares will be distributed among the associates who've been carrying the real workload while Morgan took the credit." I smiled slightly, regardless of whether their approaches seem practical to their partners. Dad slumped in his chair, decades of certainty crumbling around him. "Does your mother know?" "She will. There's a partners meeting tomorrow. You should both attend." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Please, Eliza, we need to talk about Morgan's firm. He's devastated." I showed Dad the message. "Still think Morgan needs my inheritance." He had the grace to look ashamed. "We thought we were doing the right thing." "No. You thought you were backing the sure bet. The safe choice." I leaned back in my chair. "Well, here's what your safe choice has been up to." I pulled up bank records from the last 3 years. Morgan at luxury hotels with clients' wives. Morgan at high-stakes poker games using firm funds. Morgan taking out loans against the family name. He's been gambling with the firm's reputation for years, I said. Small compromises at first, then bigger ones. I caught him trying to settle a sexual harassment case against himself 6 months ago. Dad's face had gone from pale to ashen. Why didn't you tell us? Like I said, would you have believed me? He buried his face in his hands. What happens now? Now, I said, standing. You go home and talk to your wife and son. Really talk to them. Then, tomorrow, you come to the partners' meeting and learn exactly how your, quote, impractical daughter saved your legacy. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I'm sorry, Eliza, we should have listened. Yes, you should have, but tomorrow isn't about apologies. It's about finally seeing clearly. After he left, Dominic lingered, leaning against my desk. Think they'll actually show up tomorrow? I smiled, thinking of the other documents waiting in my safe. Oh, they'll show up. Because they still don't know the biggest secret. The offshore accounts? No. I pulled out one final file. Evidence that Morgan had been selling client information to rival firms. They don't know that their perfect son is the reason the firm nearly failed in the first place. Dominic whistled low. You're not going to make this easy on them, are you? No, I said, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber, a city I now quietly helped shape through Community First's vision. Because some lessons need to be learned the hard way. The Ellis and Associates conference room felt different from this side of the table. I sat at the head, watching morning light stream through the windows my grandfather had installed 35 years ago. The same windows I used to look through as a child, imagining the day I'd have a voice in this room. They arrived exactly on time. Mom, Dad, and Morgan, who hadn't been invited but predictably crashed the meeting anyway. Mom's expensive suit couldn't hide her nervous fidgeting. Dad looked like he hadn't slept. Morgan's face was fixed in his practiced, confident expression, the one that had fooled everyone for so long. Thank you for coming, I said, gesturing to the seats. Please sit. The other partners filed in behind them, longtime associates who'd watched the firm slowly decline without understanding why. They'd been shocked to learn about my acquisition, but intrigued by the preliminary reports Dominic had circulated. Before we begin, I announced, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Yes, Community First Properties has acquired controlling interest in Ellis and Associates. Yes, I am now the majority partner. And yes, everything you thought you knew about this firm's problems is wrong. I nodded to Zoe, who began distributing thick folders to everyone present. What you're looking at, I continued, is a comprehensive audit of Ellis and Associates over the past 5 years. Pay particular attention to pages 23 through 46. The room filled with the sound of rustling papers and sharp intakes of breath. Morgan's face had gone completely white. As you can see, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence, someone has been systematically compromising our client confidentiality. Settlements leaked before they're finalized. Strategy documents appearing in opposing counsel's briefs. Client lists finding their way to competitors. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. That's impossible. We have strict security protocols. Using a managing partner's access code, I cut in. One belonging to Dad, but accessed from a different IP address. One that traces back to a certain Harvard graduate's personal devices. All eyes turned to Morgan. That's ridiculous, he stammered. I would never. I pressed a button on my laptop. The large screen behind me flickered to life, showing security footage of Morgan in Dad's office late at night, accessing confidential files. Another clip showed him meeting with representatives from rival firms. Then came the bank statements. Regular deposits into an offshore account under a shell corporation name. $2. $7 million, I said quietly. That's how much you made selling out our grandfather's legacy. I can explain. Morgan jumped to his feet. It's not what it looks like. Sit down, I commanded, my voice sharp enough to make him drop back into his chair. I'm not finished. I turned to the partners. The good news is we've already contained the leaks. Community First's acquisition included implementing new security protocols. The compromise cases have been reviewed, and we're preparing to notify affected clients with appropriate remediation plans. Quote, Mom had started crying silently. But the law firm was never going to survive anyway, I finished, because Morgan never actually passed the bar exam. His license is forged, just like client signatures on those settlement documents, just like the billing records he's been inflating for years. I pulled out one more document, a letter from the State Bar Association confirming they had no record of Morgan Ellis ever sitting for, let alone passing, the bar exam. The money he stole wasn't for a new firm, I continued. It was for gambling debts, luxury vacations, affairs with clients' spouses, all financed with the profits from selling our family's future. The conference room had gone deathly quiet. You're disbarred, of course, I told Morgan, and the evidence has been turned over to the authorities. They'll be here within the hour. You can't do this, he shouted, rising again. I'm your brother. No, I said calmly. You're a fraud who happened to share my last name, and now you're going to face the consequences. Right on cue, 2 officers from the White Collar Crimes Division appeared in the doorway. As they led Morgan away, his threats echoing down the hallway, I turned back to the stunned partners. Now, I said, pulling out another set of documents, let's talk about the firm's future. Over the next hour, I outlined my plans for Ellis & Associates. New practice areas focused on community development and affordable housing law, improved client services, expanded pro bono work that would rebuild our reputation while honoring my grandfather's original vision. The partners listened with growing enthusiasm as projections scrolled across the screen. When the meeting finally ended, only my parents remained, looking shell-shocked and suddenly aged. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Mom whispered. Would you have believed me over your perfect son? I asked. The one who could do no wrong? The one who deserved my inheritance because he was more practical? Dad couldn't meet my eyes. We failed you. Yes, I agreed. You did. But this isn't about failure anymore. It's about moving forward. I handed them each a final document, new contracts outlining their reduced roles in the firm. Still involved, but with clear oversight and limitations. Sign or resign, I said. Your choice. Their signatures were shaky but quick. As they stood to leave, Mom paused. Can you ever forgive us? I looked around the conference room, my conference room now, thinking of all the times I'd been told I didn't belong here. Forgiveness isn't the point, I said finally. Understanding is. Understanding that sometimes the quiet ones are watching, learning, building, and waiting for the perfect moment to show exactly who they've always been. After they left, I stood at my grandfather's windows watching the city buzz below. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Morgan's arrest was already making headlines. Mom's social circle would be buzzing with gossip within hours. Dad's legal friends would be calling nonstop. But I didn't care about any of that, because I had finally done what I'd set out to do, prove that practical dreams aren't always the biggest ones, that quiet ambition can build empires, that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies but succeeding so completely that they're forced to watch from the sidelines. Zoe knocked softly. Your next appointment is here, the Community Housing Board for the East Side Development. I smiled, straightening my jacket. Send them in. Because this wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning of my legacy. And this time, everyone would know exactly who built it. The partners' meeting had been 3 months ago, and Ellis & Associates was already showing signs of renewal. I sat in what had once been my grandfather's office, now mine, reviewing the quarterly reports. Our client retention had improved by 37%, and we'd secured 4 major contracts with Community First's newest development projects. More importantly, our associates were engaged again, bringing innovative approaches to cases that had once seemed routine. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Your mother is here to see you, Zoe announced, her tone carefully neutral. I hadn't spoken to either of my parents outside of official firm business since that final confrontation. They'd followed the terms of our new arrangement with surprising compliance, showing up for client meetings, handling their reduced caseload, keeping their opinions to themselves. But they hadn't attempted any personal reconciliation. Until now. Send her in, I said, closing my laptop. Mom entered hesitantly, looking different than I remembered. The perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes were still there, but something in her bearing had changed. The imperious confidence that had defined her my entire life had given way to something more tentative. "Eliza," she said, hovering near the door. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you?" She sat down, placing her handbag carefully on her lap like a shield. "I wanted to talk to you about the Riverside Community Center project." This wasn't what I'd expected. The community center was the cornerstone of our revitalization efforts, a multi-purpose facility that would provide educational resources, healthcare services, and recreational spaces for the neighborhood. "What about it?" "I'd like to be involved," she said, her voice steadier now. "I have some ideas for the legal framework that might help streamline the permitting process." I studied her face, looking for hidden motives. "Why the sudden interest in community development? You've always specialized in luxury real estate." Mom looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. "When your father and I first started dating, we both wanted to practice public interest law. Did you know that?" I shook my head. This was news to me. We had big dreams about helping communities secure affordable housing, fighting predatory landlords. A wistful smile crossed her face. "Then your grandfather offered your father a position at the firm, and the salary was too good to pass up. We told ourselves we'd do pro bono work on the side, that we'd never forget why we became lawyers." "What happened?" "Life, mortgages, private schools for you and Morgan. The pressure to maintain appearances." She sighed. "Somewhere along the way, we became exactly the kind of lawyers we once despised." I leaned back in my chair, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. "When I saw your plans for the community center," she continued, "it reminded me of proposals I drafted 30 years ago, projects I never pursued." She finally met my gaze. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Eliza. I'm asking for a chance to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place." The request hung in the air between us, fragile and unexpected. I thought of all the times I'd sought her approval, all the times I'd been dismissed. Now she was asking for mine. "The permitting committee meets on Thursdays at 9 a.m., I said finally. "Don't be late." The relief on her face was palpable. "Thank you." As she stood to leave, I asked the question that had been bothering me for months. "Why did you always favor Morgan, even when the evidence of his failures was right in front of you?" Mom paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Because he needed it. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. You figured things out on your own. Morgan needed to be propped up, validated constantly." She shook her head. "I realize now that was our failure as parents, not yours as a daughter." After she left, I sat in silence, turning her words over in my mind. It wasn't the apology I'd been waiting for, but it was something I hadn't expected. Honesty. My phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. "Just left meeting with Westside developers. They're in. Full funding secured for the next 3 projects. Progress on all fronts." I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before returning to work. The community center groundbreaking was scheduled for next week, and there were still contracts to finalize, permits to secure, and a dozen other details demanding my attention. This was what victory looked like, not dramatic confrontations, but the steady, relentless work of building something that would last. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony dawned clear and bright. A stage had been set up at the construction site, with rows of chairs for community members, investors, and the press. I stood off to the side, reviewing my speech one last time, when a familiar figure approached. "Mr. Harrington," I said, surprised to see my grandfather's lawyer. "I didn't realize you were attending today." The elderly attorney smiled, his eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I wouldn't miss it. Your grandfather would have been proud." The mention of Grandpa Ellis sent an unexpected pang through my chest. I'm not so sure. I haven't exactly followed the traditional family path. "No," Mr. Harrington agreed. "You've forged a better one." He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase. "Actually, I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age, my name written across the front in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "What is this?" I asked, turning it over in my hands. Your grandfather asked me to give it to you when the time was right. After seeing everything you've accomplished, I believe that time is now. He patted my shoulder gently. Read it when you have a moment alone. Before I could ask more questions, Zoe appeared, informing me that the ceremony was about to begin. I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket, pushing my curiosity aside to focus on the task at hand. The ceremony went perfectly. Local officials praised the project's vision, community representatives expressed their gratitude, and Dominic delivered a compelling overview of our long-term development plans. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself departing from my prepared remarks. 3 years ago, I stood in this neighborhood and saw not what it was, but what it could be, I told the crowd. Not everyone shared that vision. In fact, most people told me it was impractical, unrealistic, a waste of time and resources. From the corner of my eye, I could see my parents in the audience, listening intently. But the greatest achievements often begin as impractical dreams. The most meaningful change comes from those willing to question the established order. Today, we're not just breaking ground on a building. We're breaking ground on a new way of thinking about development, one that puts community needs first and profit second. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of the project, but of the path I'd chosen. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled over refreshments, I slipped away to a quiet corner of the construction site. Sitting on a stack of lumber, I finally opened my grandfather's envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, dated just 1 month before his death. My dearest Eliza, it began. If you're reading this, then Mr. Harrington has determined that you've found your way, despite the obstacles I fear your parents will place in your path. I've always seen myself in you, not in your brother, despite what everyone believes. You have the vision, the tenacity, and the heart that built Ellis & Associates from nothing. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I've watched you grow, seen how your ideas are dismissed by those who should nurture them. I've attempted to guide your parents toward a better understanding of your potential, but old habits are difficult to break. They see success only in traditional forms, missing the innovation that will be necessary for our family's legacy to truly endure. My hands shook slightly as I turned the page. This is why I've made arrangements that your parents know nothing about. While the public reading of my will shall proceed as expected, with the bulk of my visible assets directed as your parents wish, there exists a separate trust in your name. Within it, you will find the seed capital for whatever venture you choose to pursue, along with my original client list, those small businesses and community organizations that formed the true heart of our firm before it lost its way. I paused, overwhelmed by what I was reading. More valuable than money, however, is my partnership stake in Oakwood Development, the company that owns the majority of the Riverside District. I acquired it quietly over the years, believing that neighborhood held untapped potential. The paperwork transferring this stake to you has already been filed. Mr. Harrington has instructions to reveal this transfer only when you have demonstrated that you can use it wisely. I thought of the Riverside Revitalization Project, how surprisingly smoothly the property acquisitions had gone, how many doors had opened with unexpected ease. Had my grandfather been guiding my path even after his death? I do not know what shape your dreams will take, Eliza, but I trust they will honor the values that matter most: integrity, community, and courage. My only request is that when you succeed, and I have no doubt that you will, you remember that true legacy isn't measured in dollars or buildings, but in the lives you impact and the changes you inspire. The letter was signed simply, "With unwavering faith in you, Grandpa." I sat motionless, the letter clutched in my hands as pieces fell into place. All this time, I'd thought I was building something entirely on my own, proving my worth against my family's expectations. But my grandfather had seen me, truly seen me, and provided invisible support I hadn't known existed. It didn't diminish my accomplishments. It magnified them through the lens of a legacy I hadn't realized I was carrying forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "People are asking for you. Everything okay?" I tucked the letter carefully back into its envelope and wiped away my tears. "On my way," I replied. When I returned to the reception, I found my parents standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, observing the animated conversations between community members and our development team. "This is quite impressive, Eliza," Dad said as I approached. "The scope of what you've accomplished here. I had no idea." "That's been the problem all along, hasn't it?" I replied, not unkindly. "You never really looked." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I'm looking now." "We both are." Mom gestured toward the architectural renderings displayed on easels. "The community center design is remarkable. Sustainable materials, multi-purpose spaces, childcare facilities. You've thought of everything." "Not just me," I corrected her. "I assembled a team of people whose expertise I respect and whose vision aligns with mine. That's something Grandpa taught me. Surround yourself with people who challenge you to be better." "Your grandfather was a wise man," Dad said quietly. "Yes, he was." I touched the envelope in my pocket. "Wiser than any of us knew." Something in my tone made them exchange a glance. "Is there something we should know?" Mom asked. "Not yet," I said. "But soon." The mystery of my response clearly unsettled them, but before they could press further, Dominic approached with the mayor and several city council members, eager to discuss next steps for the project. "If you'll excuse me," I said to my parents, "duty calls." As I moved through the crowd, introducing key stakeholders and answering questions about our vision, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The anger and vindication that had driven me for so long had transformed into something more sustainable. Determination to honor not just my own ambitions, but the legacy my grandfather believed I could build. The following week, I called a special meeting of the Ellis & Associates partners. The conference room was packed, with junior associates standing along the walls, curious about the sudden announcement. My parents arrived last, taking their usual seats near the head of the table, seats that now placed them to my right rather than at the center of power. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began. "As you know, the past quarter has shown significant improvement in our firm's performance. The community-first contracts have stabilized our finances, and our return to community-focused practice areas has attracted new clients aligned with our values." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Even the most skeptical partners couldn't argue with the numbers. Today, however, I want to discuss not just where we are, but where we're going. I nodded to Zoe, who distributed folders to everyone present. "What you're looking at is a proposal for the complete restructuring of Ellis & Associates." The room went quiet as people opened their folders and began reading. Mom and Dad exchanged nervous glances. For too long, this firm has operated on a traditional hierarchy that rewards seniority over innovation and billable hours over actual impact. The model I'm proposing shifts our focus to outcome-based compensation, collaborative practice groups, and a significant expansion of our pro bono program. One of the older partners, Jackson Miller, cleared his throat. "This is quite radical, Eliza. It upends decades of established practice." "Yes, it does," I agreed. "And it's exactly what my grandfather would have wanted." I reached into my bag and pulled out my grandfather's letter, along with a second document Mr. Harrington had delivered to me that morning. What many of you don't know is that Ellis & Associates was founded on principles very different from those it operates on today. My grandfather started this firm to serve small businesses and community organizations that couldn't afford high-priced legal representation. It was only later, as the firm grew, that it shifted toward more lucrative corporate clients. I passed my grandfather's original mission statement around the table. The yellowed paper contained language that would have seemed idealistic, even naive, in our current corporate culture. Ellis & Associates will measure its success not by the wealth of its partners, but by the positive impact it creates in the communities it serves. Mom stared at the document, recognition dawning in her eyes. "I remember this. Your grandfather showed it to me when I first joined the firm. I thought it was impractical." "It wasn't impractical," I said. "It was visionary. And now, we have the opportunity to return to that vision while creating a financially sustainable model for the future." I spent the next hour walking them through the details, How our work with Community First had already proven that community-focused law could be profitable. How our new structure would attract younger talent tired of soul-crushing corporate practice. How our brand could become synonymous with ethical development and social impact. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, it was Dad who spoke first. "I'm in favor," he said simply. "It's time we remembered why we became lawyers in the first place." One by one, the other partners voiced their support, some enthusiastic, others cautious but willing. By the end of the meeting, the restructuring proposal had been approved unanimously. As people filed out, Dad lingered behind. "That letter," he said, gesturing to my grandfather's envelope. "When did you receive it?" "Mr. Harrington gave it to me at the groundbreaking. Grandpa left instructions for him to deliver it when he felt I was ready." Dad nodded slowly. "There's something you should know about your inheritance, Eliza. The funds we redirected to Morgan, they weren't the bulk of your grandfather's estate." I waited, saying nothing. The real inheritance was the controlling interest in Ellis and Associates. Your grandfather left instructions that it should pass to whichever grandchild demonstrated the vision to lead the firm forward. We assumed that would be Morgan with his Harvard degree and connections. We never even considered. His voice trailed off. That it might be me. I finished for him. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time in my life I believed him. We were wrong. About everything. I thought of all the years I'd spent seeking his approval, of the disappointment that had fueled my determination to succeed without him. The anger that had driven me for so long felt suddenly heavy, a weight I was tired of carrying. "You know what the hardest part was?" I said quietly. "Not that you favored Morgan. Not even that you dismissed my ideas. It was that you never once asked me what I wanted, what my dreams were. You just assumed they couldn't possibly be valid." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like to ask now if you'll let me. Tell me about your vision, Eliza. Not just for the firm or Community First, but for yourself." The question caught me off guard. For so long, my vision had been shaped by the need to prove myself, to show them all what they'd missed. What did I want now that I'd succeeded beyond even my own expectations? "I want to transform how development works in this city," I said finally. "Not just building affordable housing, but creating truly integrated communities where people from different backgrounds live and work together. I want Ellis and Associates to be the legal force behind that transformation, redefining what corporate social responsibility looks like in practice." I paused, then added more softly, "And someday, I want to mentor young women who've been told their ideas are too impractical, show them that vision combined with tenacity can change the world." Dad nodded, wiping away a tear. "Your grandfather would be proud. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become in spite of our mistakes." Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in my grandfather's, my office, reading his letter again. The words felt different now, less like a vindication and more like a torch being passed. My phone rang, displaying Dominic's number. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without preamble. I pulled up the local news site on my computer. The headline made me catch my breath. "Morgan Ellis, arrested on fraud charges." The article detailed how my brother had been caught attempting to forge documents for a new business venture, claiming to have backing from investors who had never heard of him. His fall from grace was complete and public. "Are you okay?" Dominic asked. I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My brother was facing criminal charges. My family's name was being dragged through the mud. The revenge fantasy I'd harbored for so long had played out even more dramatically than I could have orchestrated myself. And yet, I felt no satisfaction in Morgan's downfall. Only a hollow sadness for the person he might have become if our parents hadn't protected him from the consequences of his actions for so long. "I'm fine," I said finally, "but I need you to do something for me." "Name it. Contact our lawyers. I want to make sure Morgan has proper representation." Dominic was silent for a moment. "After everything he did to you? To the firm?" This isn't about forgiveness, I explained. It's about being better than they were, breaking the cycle. Morgan needs to face consequences, but he also needs the chance to learn from them, something our parents never gave him. After hanging up, I walked to the windows and looked out at the city lights. In the distance, I could see the Riverside District, where construction on our community center was already underway. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. True legacy isn't measured in dollars or buildings, but in the lives you impact and the changes you inspire. The victory I'd achieved wasn't in taking control of the firm or proving my parents wrong. It was in finding the strength to forge my own path while honoring the values that mattered most. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mr. Harrington. Your grandfather kept one more thing for you. Come by my office tomorrow. It's time. I smiled, wondering what final surprise my grandfather had arranged. Whatever it was, I was ready, not because I needed more validation or resources, but because I finally understood that my worth had never depended on my family's recognition. The real inheritance had been inside me all along. The courage to stand firm in my convictions, the vision to see possibilities others missed, and the determination to build something meaningful despite every obstacle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps one last message from the man who had believed in me when no one else did. But tonight, standing in the office I had earned through my own efforts, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because anyone had given me permission to be here, but because I had given myself permission to become the person I was always meant to be. Mr. Harrington's office hadn't changed in the decades I'd been coming here. The same oak desk, leather-bound law books lining dark wood shelves, and the persistent scent of lemon polish and old paper. But today, sitting across from him as an equal rather than a child, everything felt different. Your grandfather was quite a strategist, Mr. Harrington said, unlocking an antique filing cabinet behind his desk. He anticipated moves years in advance, like a chess master. You knew all along, didn't you? I asked. About Morgan's fraud, about my work with Community First. You knew and never said a word. The elderly lawyer's eyes twinkled behind his glasses. It wasn't my place to interfere. Richard Ellis was very specific about allowing events to unfold naturally. He believed the truth would eventually surface. It always does. He placed a small wooden box on his desk, its surface polished by years of handling. The Ellis family crest was carved into the lid. The scales of justice balanced atop an oak tree. This is the final piece of your inheritance, Mr. Harrington said. Your grandfather wanted you to receive it only after you'd proven yourself. Not just as a businesswoman, but as someone who understands what legacy truly means. I reached for the box with unexpected reverence. It was heavier than it looked. Before you open it, Mr. Harrington said, there's something else you should know. Your brother came to see me yesterday. My hand froze on the box lid. Morgan? I thought he was under house arrest pending trial. He is. The authorities made an exception for legal consultation. Mr. Harrington folded his hands on the desk. He asked me to show you this. From his desk drawer, he withdrew a thick manila envelope and slid it across to me. What is it? I asked, not reaching for it. A full confession. Names, dates, amounts, everything. He's admitting to all of it, including several fraudulent activities we weren't yet aware of. I finally picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Why would he do this? It guarantees he'll serve time. Perhaps you should read his note, Mr. Harrington suggested, indicating a smaller white envelope, paper clipped to the front. I hesitated, then opened it, unfolding a single sheet of Morgan's distinctive stationery. Eliza, it began, by the time you read this, I'll have already entered my guilty plea. No deals, no reduced charges. I'm finally taking responsibility for my actions. It's strange how clearly you can see things when everything falls apart. For years, I've been running from one lie to the next, terrified of being exposed as the fraud I am. I never passed the bar. I never even finished law school. I forged my Harvard diploma and transcripts. Mom and Dad were so eager to believe in my success that they never questioned it. You were always the real deal. The one with integrity, vision, and actual talent. I hated you for it. Every time you suggested something brilliant that got ignored, I felt both relief and shame. Relief that I remained the favorite, and shame that I knew you deserved better. Quote, you did it the right way, the hard way, while I took every shortcut and still failed. Take care of Mom and Dad. They're flawed, but they love you. They just didn't know how to show it to someone who didn't need constant validation like I did. Goodbye, little sister. Build something that lasts. Morgan. I refolded the letter carefully, emotions I couldn't quite name swirling through me. Is he really pleading guilty? The hearing was this morning, Mr. Harrington confirmed. No legal maneuvering, no attempts to shift blame. He stood before the judge and took full responsibility. I sat back, processing this unexpected development. Morgan, the golden child, the master manipulator, finally facing consequences on his own terms. It wasn't the ending I'd anticipated. Now, Mr. Harrington said gently, I believe you have one more inheritance to claim. I returned my attention to the wooden box, lifting the lid carefully. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay my grandfather's pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Ellis men. Beside it was a small golden key and a handwritten note. The watch was expected, I said, lifting it reverently. The weight of it in my palm felt significant, a tangible symbol of trust. But what's this key for? Mr. Harrington smiled. That unlocks your grandfather's private vault at First National. Inside, you'll find his personal journals documenting the true history of Ellis and Associates. Not the sanitized version in the company brochures, but the real story, complete with mistakes made, lessons learned, and wisdom earned the hard way. I turned the small key over in my fingers. Why keep these hidden? Because truth is a powerful thing, Eliza. Your grandfather believed that true wisdom couldn't be given. It had to be earned through experience. He wanted you to forge your own path before looking at his. I slipped both the watch and key into my pocket, feeling their weight against my hip. Thank you for keeping these safe. And for knowing when I was ready. Mr. Harrington's eyes crinkled at the corners. I was merely following Richard's instructions. He knew you better than anyone, it seems. As I stood to leave, a final question occurred to me. The envelope at the groundbreaking ceremony, was that timing your decision or his? The elderly lawyer's smile deepened. Richard left very specific instructions. Give Eliza the letter. When she's standing on ground, she transformed herself. I've been waiting for the right moment since his passing. I thought about this as I drove to the bank, the weight of the key in my pocket, a constant reminder of connections that transcended time and misunderstanding. My grandfather had seen me clearly when no one else had planned for a future where I would need not just financial resources but emotional anchoring as well. The bank vault was located in the oldest section of First National, behind ornate iron gates that spoke of a different era. A suited attendant led me to a small private room where my grandfather's safety deposit box awaited. With slightly trembling hands, I inserted the key and turned it. The lid opened with a soft click, revealing several leather-bound journals stacked neatly inside, along with a manila envelope and a smaller velvet pouch. I lifted the topmost journal, opening to the first page. My grandfather's bold handwriting filled the pages, dating back to 1970, the year he founded Ellis and Associates. Today I hung my shingle as a solo practitioner, he had written. Everyone says I'm crazy to turn down Bradshaw and Mitchell's partnership offer, but their corporate focus leaves me cold. I want to build something different, a firm that serves people, not just profits. Eleanor thinks I've lost my mind, but she supports me anyway. That's love, I suppose. Believing in someone's dream even when it seems impossible. I smiled, recognizing the same idealism that had driven my own decisions. Flipping through the pages, I found entries documenting early struggles, ethical dilemmas, moments of doubt, and hard-won victories. Then I came across an entry from 1997, the year I was born. Held my granddaughter today, Elizabeth Marie Ellis. There's something special in her eyes already. A curiosity, a determination. Catherine thinks I'm imagining things, seeing legal potential in an infant, but I know what I saw. This child will change things. I only hope I live long enough to see it. Tears pricked at my eyes. He had believed in me from the very beginning. I set the journal aside and opened the manila envelope. Inside was the original deed to the Ellis family home. Not the mansion my parents now occupied, but the modest craftsman bungalow where my grandfather had raised my father. where I had spent weekends as a child learning to garden and build birdhouses. Attached was a note. For Eliza, when she's ready to plant roots of her own. Some spaces hold more wisdom than others. The house had been sold after my grandmother passed, or so I'd been told. Apparently, that had been yet another family fiction. Finally, I opened the velvet pouch and gasped. Inside was my grandmother's engagement ring, a simple emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. I remembered admiring it as a child, fascinated by how the green stone seemed to change colors in different light. Another note accompanied it. This belonged to a woman who valued substance over show, integrity over impression, like you. I sat in that quiet room for over an hour, reading journal entries and absorbing the legacy that had been waiting for me, not of wealth or status, but of principles and purpose. When I finally emerged, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the financial district. On impulse, I directed my driver to take me to the old Ellis house in Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood that had once been prestigious but had fallen into gentle decline as newer, flashier suburbs developed. The house stood just as I remembered it, white with green shutters, a wide front porch with a swing, mature oak trees shading the yard. A for sale sign had been planted near the sidewalk, looking weathered and forgotten. I walked up the cracked concrete path, memories washing over me. This was where Grandpa had taught me to play chess, explaining that every move should serve a greater strategy. Where we'd built model bridges at the dining room table, testing their weight capacities with stacks of coins. Where he'd listened to my ideas without judgment or condescension. The house appeared empty, its windows dark. I peered through the front window, seeing the hardwood floors where I'd once slid in my socks, the built-in bookshelves that had held my grandfather's eclectic collection of philosophy, law, and science fiction. "Can I help you?" I turned to find an elderly woman watching me from the neighboring yard. "I was just looking," I explained. "My grandfather used to own this house." "You're Richard Ellis's granddaughter?" Her face brightened. "Well, I'll be. He always said you'd come back someday." "You knew my grandfather?" 30 years as neighbors tends to create a bond. "I'm Margaret Pearson." She approached, leaning on a walking stick. "Richard talked about you all the time. The bright one, he called you. Said you'd rebuild everything better than before." I stared at her, stunned by this unexpected connection to my past. "The house has been empty all this time?" Margaret nodded. "He left strict instructions with that lawyer of his. The house wasn't to be sold until you came looking for it." She smiled at my shocked expression. "He was quite certain you would eventually, said some things have to come full circle." I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Harrington. "I'm at Grandpa's house," I said when he answered. "The one in Oakwood Heights. Why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because Richard was explicit that you needed to find your way there on your own," he replied, a smile evident in his voice. "I take it you've met Margaret?" "Yes, but there's a spare key under the blue flower pot on the back porch. It's always been there. The utilities are still connected. The property taxes are paid through a trust. It's yours whenever you're ready." I ended the call and stood motionless, overwhelmed by the realization that my grandfather hadn't just prepared for my professional success, he'd created a sanctuary for after the battle was won. Margaret touched my arm gently. "Would you like some tea? I have photo albums you might enjoy. Richard and I used to garden together. He kept that up even after your grandmother passed." I followed her next door, spending the afternoon listening to stories about my grandfather that revealed a man more nuanced than the stern patriarch my parents had described. A man who helped neighborhood kids with their homework, who organized community cleanups, who lived the values I was now fighting to restore to his firm. By the time I left Margaret's house, dusk was settling over the neighborhood. I retrieved the key from under the flower pot and let myself into my grandfather's home. The air inside was stale but not musty. Someone had been maintaining it, keeping it ready. I wandered through rooms frozen in time, running my fingers over familiar furniture. In what had been my grandfather's study, I found his chess set still laid out mid-game. A layer of dust covered the pieces, but I recognized the strategy immediately. It was the opening he'd been teaching me during our last visit together.
In the dusty town of Millbrook, Texas, where the wind carried whispers of judgment, and the church bells rang with the weight of condemnation, A young woman's left hand would seal her fate in ways no one could imagine. What started as daily beatings for a simple twist of nature would lead to the most unlikely partnership the Wild West had ever seen. 022. Before we jump back in, tell us where...
On the desk sat a leather portfolio I'd never seen before. Opening it revealed architectural drawings for a building labeled Ellis Community Law Center, dated just 2 weeks before his death. My phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. "Where are you? The investors are waiting at Le Cirque." I'd completely forgotten about our dinner meeting with potential backers for the next phase of the Riverside project. It was an important opportunity, one I'd been pursuing for months. But suddenly, sitting in my grandfather's study surrounded by echoes of a legacy I was only beginning to understand, the meeting seemed less urgent than it had that morning. "Need to reschedule," I texted back. "Family emergency. You handle it." Dominic's response came instantly. "Everything okay?" I looked around the room, at the chess game waiting to be finished, at the community law center plans my grandfather had dreamed of but never lived to build. "Better than okay," I replied. "I'll explain tomorrow." I spent that night in my grandfather's house, sleeping in the guest room I'd used during childhood visits. In the morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt since beginning this journey of reclamation and revenge. The satisfaction of proving my parents wrong, of taking control of the firm, of watching Morgan face consequences. None of it had brought the peace I'd been seeking. But here, surrounded by my grandfather's true legacy, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me all along. Success wasn't about winning. It was about building something that mattered. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, energized by this revelation. Zoe looked surprised to see me. "I thought you'd still be at the investor dinner," she said, handing me my usual coffee. "Dominic texted that it went well without you." "I had some thinking to do," I replied. "Clear my schedule this morning and call a partners meeting for 11 a.m. The next few hours I spent drafting a new proposal, one that would take Ellis and Associates beyond mere restructuring into a completely new model. When the partners gathered in the conference room, my parents among them, I didn't waste time on preliminaries. "I've been approaching our firm's future from the wrong direction," I began, focusing on what went wrong rather than what could go right. "Today I want to present a vision that honors not just where Ellis and Associates has been, but where we could go." I unveiled my grandfather's community law center plans, updated and expanded to integrate with our existing practice areas. "This won't just be pro bono work on the side," I explained. "It will become core to our identity, a training ground for associates, a resource for our community development clients, and a living embodiment of the values this firm was founded upon." The partners listened with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. When I finished, Dad was the first to speak. "This is ambitious," he said carefully. "The financial model is unproven." "Actually," I countered, "I've been running the numbers for weeks, with the revenue stream from our community-first contracts and a more efficient approach to our corporate practice. We can make this work while maintaining partner compensation at current levels." Mom studied the proposal with unexpected interest. "The mentorship program for law students from underrepresented backgrounds. That's particularly innovative. It addresses a real need," I acknowledged. "And it creates a pipeline of diverse talent committed to our vision." The discussion continued for over an hour, partners raising concerns, suggesting refinements, gradually warming to the concept. It wasn't universal enthusiasm, but it was engagement, genuine consideration of a path forward that balanced profit with purpose. When the meeting concluded, most partners had provisionally endorsed the plan, pending detailed financial projections. As they filed out, Dad lingered behind. "You're not just fixing what Morgan and I broke," he said quietly. "You're building something entirely new." "Not entirely new?" I corrected him. "I'm returning to foundations that were always there, just buried under years of compromise and misdirection." He nodded slowly. "Your grandfather's original vision, with some updates for the current century," I added. Dad hesitated, then asked, "Is there a place for me in this new version of the firm? A real place? Not just a courtesy position because of our family connection?" The question surprised me. Since the restructuring, he'd been dutiful but not engaged, completing assigned tasks without initiative or enthusiasm. I'd assumed he was simply biding his time until retirement. "That depends," I said carefully. Why do you want to stay? He looked out the window toward the Riverside district, where construction cranes marked the progress of our development projects. I've been practicing law for 35 years, he said slowly. Most of that time, I've been focused on billable hours, corner offices, country club memberships, all the trappings of success as I was taught to define it. He turned back to me. But watching what you've accomplished in just a few years, creating something meaningful, something that actually improves people's lives, it's made me question every choice I've made. I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but saw only genuine regret. I can't change the past, he continued when I remained silent. I can't undo the ways I failed you or the firm. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of building this new future. I still have something to contribute, I think. The Community Law Center will need experienced attorneys, I said finally. Not to lead, but to mentor, to provide institutional knowledge. It won't be glamorous or particularly well paid. I'm not looking for glory, he replied. Just a chance to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place. It was almost word for word what Mom had said weeks earlier. Perhaps they were more similar than I'd realized. Both lost somewhere along the way, seduced by conventional markers of success until they'd forgotten their original purpose. Be at the planning committee meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m., I told him. And Dad? Don't be late. The relief on his face was answer enough. Later that afternoon, I visited Morgan at the detention center, where he was awaiting sentencing. He looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, the bravado and charm that had defined him stripped away by consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. I didn't expect to see you, he said as we sat across from each other at a metal table. I read your confession, I replied. It was thorough. He looked down at his hands. It was the least I could do. Too little, too late, but still. Why did you do it, Morgan? Not the fraud. I understand desperate people make desperate choices. But why maintain the lie for so long? You could have walked away, started over somewhere else. He gave a hollow laugh. And disappoint Mom and Dad? Be less than the golden child they'd built their dreams around? I couldn't bear it. He shook his head. Every lie led to another, until I was trapped in a life that wasn't mine, playing a role I was never qualified for. I studied the brother I'd resented for so long, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Not a villain, just a broken person who'd never developed the strength to stand on his own. Mr. Harrington told me you refused a plea deal. Why? Morgan met my eyes directly. Because it's time I faced consequences without someone else cleaning up my mess. You taught me that, actually. I did. When you exposed everything, when you refused to play along with the family mythology anymore, it was the first honest thing that had happened in our family in decades. He attempted a smile. It was terrifying, but also freeing. We talked for nearly an hour, not as adversaries or even as the siblings we'd been, but as two people seeing each other without the distortions of family dynamics for the first time. When the guard indicated our time was up, I made a decision. I'm establishing a fund, I told him, for your future legal education, the real kind, not the fabricated version. It will be waiting when you complete your sentence. He stared at me in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because everyone deserves a second chance to become the person they could have been. I stood up. The money comes with conditions. Therapy. Community service. Regular check-ins with a mentor I'll assign. No shortcuts this time. And if I fail again? Then you fail honestly, on your own terms. But I don't think you will. I gathered my belongings. Grandpa's journals suggest the capacity for change runs in the family. As I left the detention center, the setting sun bathed the city in a golden glow. I directed my driver not to the office or my apartment, but to the old Ellis house in Oakwood Heights. The spare key was still under the flower pot. This time when I entered, I didn't feel like a visitor examining artifacts of the past. I felt like someone coming home. In the kitchen, I found gardening gloves and seed packets in a drawer. Heirloom tomatoes, my grandfather's favorite. The planting season was still months away, but I made a note to prepare the garden beds when spring arrived. My phone buzzed with emails and texts, decisions awaiting my input, meetings requiring confirmation, The constant demands of the empire I was building, they could wait. Tonight was for connecting with the legacy that had shaped me, the values I wanted to carry forward. I made my way to the study and sat at my grandfather's desk, opening his chess set. The game he'd left unfinished waited patiently for its next move. I studied the board, remembering his lessons about strategy and foresight, about sacrifices made for long-term advantage. Then, with deliberate care, I moved a knight to c6, the counter he'd been teaching me, designed not to attack but to strengthen my position for moves yet to come. It felt right, this quiet continuation of a conversation interrupted by time but never truly ended. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build and grow. But tonight, in the peace of this house that had shaped generations of Ellis lawyers, I understood that true success wasn't measured in victories over others, but in fidelity to one's deepest values. My grandfather had known this, had lived it, even when the firm he founded strayed from its purpose. And somehow, across time and misunderstanding, he'd managed to pass that wisdom to me. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar app, creating a new recurring event. Chess with Grandpa, Sunday afternoons, Ellis House. Some traditions deserve to be honored. Some conversations deserve to continue, even if only in spirit. Then I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and simply sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the house settle around me, feeling more certain than ever that I was exactly where I needed to be, at the intersection of past and future, of legacy received and legacy created. 6 months had transformed the old Ellis house, from a time capsule, into a living space that honored the past while embracing the present. The hardwood floors gleamed with fresh polish. The kitchen now featured updated appliances alongside my grandfather's cherished cast iron cookware, and the study had become my favorite place to work when I needed clarity away from the office. This morning, sunlight streamed through newly restored windows as I stood in the backyard, surveying the garden beds I'd spent weekends preparing. Spring had arrived in earnest, and the heirloom tomato seedlings my grandfather had saved, miraculously still viable after all these years, were ready for transplanting. "You've got his touch with plants," Margaret called from her side of the fence. At 82, my neighbor remained sharp-eyed and full of stories about the neighborhood's history. Richard always said gardens teach the best lessons about patience and proper foundations. I smiled, remembering how my grandfather had insisted on spending weeks improving the soil before allowing me to plant a single seed during childhood visits. "Preparation determines outcome, Lizzie," he'd say. "In gardening and in life." "The community center plans are being finalized today," I told Margaret, who had become both friend and informal advisor over the past months. "We're breaking ground next month." "Richard would be proud," she said, "not just of what you're building, but how you're building it." My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Mr. Harrington has arrived with the documents." "Duty calls?" I told Margaret. "Rain check on tea this afternoon?" She waved me off with a smile. "Go change the world. The tea will wait." Inside, I found Mr. Harrington in the dining room, documents spread across the table my grandfather and I had once used for chess games and bridge-building competitions. Despite his age, the lawyer remained sharp and engaged, particularly in this project that connected past vision with future reality. "The final property acquisition for the Ellis Community Law Center is complete," he announced with satisfaction. "All permits approved, contractors secured. All that remains is your signature." I reviewed the documents carefully, noting how the plans had evolved from my grandfather's initial concept into something more comprehensive. The center would provide free legal services to low-income residents, training for law students focused on community advocacy, and collaborative workspace for nonprofit organizations serving the Riverside District. "There's something poetic about building this on the site of the old courthouse," Mr. Harrington observed. "A symbol of justice transformed from an institution that often failed the community into a resource that empowers it." "Grandpa chose the location deliberately," I replied, signing the final authorization. His journals mentioned how many families he watched being evicted through that court, how many small businesses he saw bankrupted by predatory practices. He wanted to reclaim the space. Mr. Harrington gathered the signed documents with practiced efficiency. "Speaking of reclamation, I have news about your brother." My pen paused over the last signature. And his community service coordinator says he's showing genuine aptitude for helping fellow inmates with legal questions. I allowed myself a small smile. Morgan's sentencing had been fair but not excessive. 3 years, with possibility of early release for good behavior and completion of rehabilitation programs. He'd accepted it without appeal or complaint, his first step toward genuine accountability. Has he asked about the fund? I'd established a trust to support Morgan's legitimate legal education upon his release, structured to release funds only for verified educational expenses and basic living costs during his studies. No, Mr. Harrington replied. But he did ask if you would consider visiting again. He has something he wants to discuss with you. I considered this as I completed the final signature. My last visit to Morgan had been 6 weeks ago. A cautiously cordial conversation about his coursework and the changes at the firm. The bitterness and resentment that had characterized our relationship for decades had been replaced by something more complicated. Not quite forgiveness, but a mutual recognition of how family dynamics had damaged us both. I'll go next week, I decided. After the board meeting. Mr. Harrington nodded approvingly. Reconciliation is its own form of justice, Eliza, one your grandfather valued highly. After he left, I changed into professional attire for the day's meetings, opting for a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation. The woman who stared back from the mirror looked nothing like the overlooked daughter who had once served coffee to make ends meet. Success had given me confidence, but it was purpose that had truly transformed me. The drive to Ellis & Associates, now officially renamed Ellis Community Law Partners, took me through the Riverside District, where Community First's development projects were visibly changing the landscape. New mixed-income housing stood alongside restored historic buildings. The community garden we'd established occupied a once-vacant lot. Children played in a pocket park that had previously been an abandoned gas station. These visible changes reinforced what the financial reports already confirmed. Ethical development could be profitable. Our investment partners were seeing returns that matched or exceeded traditional development models, while creating lasting value for the community. At the office, I found Mom reviewing educational materials for an upcoming community workshop on tenant rights. The past 6 months had revealed a side of her I'd never seen, a methodical, detail-oriented lawyer with genuine passion for helping families navigate housing challenges. The simplified lease guide is ready for printing, she reported as I passed her desk, and I've lined up 3 fair housing attorneys to staff Saturday's clinic. Good work, I replied, still adjusting to our new professional relationship. The mother who had dismissed my ideas now reported to me, accepted my direction, and seemed genuinely engaged in work that aligned with her long-buried ideals. My office, once my grandfather's, briefly my father's, and now mine, had been redesigned to reflect the firm's new direction. The imposing mahogany desk had been replaced with a round conference table that eliminated hierarchical seating. The walls displayed photographs of community projects rather than formal portraits of partners past. Dominic was waiting when I arrived, reviewing quarterly projections on his tablet. The West Side expansion numbers look solid, he said by way of greeting. And the Sustainable Materials Initiative is generating significant media attention. 3 more development firms have reached out about adopting our blueprint. And the affordable housing quotas? I asked, pouring coffee for both of us. This had been our most controversial policy, requiring that 40% of all Community First housing units remain affordable for moderate and low-income residents. Exceeding targets by 12%, Dominic confirmed. And the community engagement metrics are off the charts. Turns out people who feel invested in their neighborhoods take better care of properties and create stronger community bonds. Who would have thought? His smile carried the satisfaction of proven hypotheses. Our partnership had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. Dominic's business acumen complemented my strategic vision, creating a model that balanced profit with purpose in ways that were attracting attention across the industry. The board meeting today will include a vote on expanding the Community Law Center concept to 3 additional neighborhoods, I reminded him. Is the financial modeling complete? Finished this morning. He handed me a thumb drive. The 5-year projections show sustainability for all locations, with the original center becoming revenue positive in year 3 through its training programs and consulting services. Perfect timing, I said, glancing at the clock. The partners should be gathering now. The firm's conference room had undergone the same transformation as my office, with the imposing rectangular table replaced by a more democratic circular arrangement. Natural light flooded the space through windows that had previously been covered by heavy drapes, another symbolic change that reflected our commitment to transparency. Dad was already there, organizing presentation materials with a focus that had been absent during his years as managing partner. Retirement had never suited him, but meaningful work had revitalized his energy and expertise. The neighborhood assessment reports are updated with last week's community input, he reported. And I've prepared talking points addressing the most common concerns from the steering committee. Thanks, I said, still occasionally surprised by his willingness to handle details he would once have delegated. How was yesterday's mentoring session with the law students? His face brightened. Promising group, especially that young woman from Riverside Community College, Tamara. Her analysis of the zoning challenges was impressively thorough. Grandpa would have liked her, I observed. She reminds me of those journal entries about his early associates. Brilliant minds that mainstream firms overlooked because they didn't fit the expected mold. Dad nodded, a flash of regret crossing his features. I spent too many years perpetuating that mold instead of breaking it. Your grandfather understood that diversity of thought creates stronger legal strategies. The remaining partners and associates filed in, a mix of longtime Ellis attorneys who had embraced our new direction and new recruits drawn by our community-focused model. What had once been a traditional hierarchy had evolved into collaborative practice groups organized around expertise and community needs, rather than billable hours. Mom slipped in just as the meeting was about to begin, taking her place in the circle without the fanfare that had once accompanied her arrivals. The performative aspects of leadership had fallen away as genuine purpose took root. Before we begin the formal agenda, I announced once everyone was seated, I'd like to share some news that arrived this morning. The American Bar Association has selected Ellis Community Law Partners to receive this year's Innovation in Access to Justice Award. Appreciative murmurs circled the room. This recognition from our peers validated what our financial results were already proving, that reimagining legal practice around community needs could succeed by every measure. This award belongs to everyone in this room, I continued, particularly those who took a chance on our new direction when the outcome was far from certain. My gaze briefly met my parents, acknowledging their journey from skeptics to advocates. The meeting proceeded efficiently, with practice groups reporting progress on initiatives ranging from eviction defense to small business support. When we reached the vote on expanding the Community Law Center model, approval was unanimous, a far cry from the contentious debates that had characterized our early restructuring discussions. As the meeting concluded, Zoe appeared at the door. Ms. Ellis, there's a call you'll want to take in your office. The governor's chief of staff. I excused myself, intrigued by this unexpected contact. Governor Michaels had been a vocal supporter of community development initiatives, but had never reached out directly before. Ms. Ellis, the chief of staff began after brief pleasantries, the governor has been following your work in the Riverside district with great interest. The model you've developed for legal services integrated with community development is precisely the approach we've been seeking for our statewide housing initiative. I'm pleased to hear that, I replied cautiously. We believe our approach offers sustainable solutions to systemic challenges. The governor would like to discuss the possibility of scaling your model across multiple counties, with state support. He's establishing a Blue Ribbon Commission on Equitable Development and would like you to consider chairing it. The offer was unexpected and intriguing, an opportunity to influence policy at a level that could transform communities statewide. Yet it also represented a potential diversion from the hands-on work I'd found so fulfilling. I'm honored by the governor's confidence, I said. I'd like to review the commission's proposed scope and discuss it with my partners before making a decision. After ending the call, I sat quietly, considering the implications. My grandfather's journals had often mentioned the tension between direct service and systemic change, the challenge of balancing immediate impact with long-term transformation. A knock at my door interrupted these reflections. Dad entered, carrying a folder I didn't recognize. Sorry to intrude, he said. But there's something you should see before your meeting with the Ellis Foundation Board this afternoon. The Ellis Foundation had been another revelation from my grandfather's papers, a charitable trust he'd established decades ago, funded by a percentage of the firm's profits and his personal investments. Its purpose was supporting community development initiatives that aligned with his vision of equitable growth. I'd been surprised to discover its existence, and even more surprised to learn I'd been named its executive director in his will. "What is it?" I asked, accepting the folder. "While organizing the foundation archives, I found these," Dad explained. "Proposals your grandfather received in the year before his death, community initiatives he was considering for funding." I opened the folder to find a series of project proposals, each meticulously annotated in my grandfather's handwriting. What caught my eye was that several directly addressed challenges in neighborhoods we were now working to revitalize. He was already planning interventions in these communities, I realized, years before we began our work. Dad nodded. "Your grandfather played the long game, Eliza. He saw problems developing before others recognized them and began laying groundwork for solutions that might take decades to implement." I studied a proposal for a workforce development program in East Riverside, precisely the area where Community First was now struggling to find qualified construction workers for our affordable housing projects. "This could address our current labor shortage," I said, ideas already forming. "With updates for current conditions, of course." "There's more," Dad said, indicating the remaining documents. "Educational initiatives, small business incubators, healthcare access programs, all carefully researched and evaluated against long-term community needs." I flipped through the proposals, recognizing how they could complement and enhance our current efforts. Why didn't the foundation implement these after his death? Dad looked away, discomfort evident in his posture. "The foundation board changed direction after your grandfather passed. Morgan and I redirected funding toward more conventional charitable giving, annual galas, hospital wings, university buildings, things that generated recognition rather than impact. The admission hung between us, another example of how the Ellis legacy had been diverted from its intended purpose. But rather than reignite old resentments, it offered an opportunity to reclaim yet another piece of my grandfather's vision. "These proposals need updating," I said, already making mental notes. "But the fundamental analysis is sound. We should integrate them into our current community development strategy." Dad's relief was visible. "I hoped you'd see it that way. I've already begun researching how similar programs have evolved over the past decade." I glanced at my watch. "The foundation board meeting starts in 30 minutes. Let's present these as part of our strategic planning discussion." As we walked to the foundation's offices, located one floor below the law firm, I reflected on how completely our family dynamics had transformed. The father who had once dismissed my ideas was now bringing me forgotten initiatives that aligned perfectly with my vision. The mother who had favored my brother was now one of my most dedicated program directors. The Ellis Foundation boardroom retained more traditional elements than our reimagined law offices, a nod to the philanthropic legacy that stretched back generations. Board members were already gathering as we arrived, community leaders, financial advisors, and representatives from neighborhoods served by foundation programs. I opened the meeting with updates on current initiatives before introducing the discovered proposals. These represent not just our past, but a blueprint for our future, connecting historical insights with contemporary needs. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.